Welcome back. It's Maggie. Today, we are doing something a little different, something that feels necessary. Usually, we talk about growth in broad strokes, career, wellness, productivity, but today, I want to go directly to the heart of relationships, specifically from a perspective we don't always get to hear with this much vulnerability. We are doing a deep dive into a book that is quietly shifting the conversation for a lot of men and the women who love them. It's called A Man's Path to God, Growth, and Her, written by J.O. Reid. Now, before we get into the pages, I want to frame why this matters. We live in a culture that is obsessed with the performance of masculinity. You know what I mean. The stoicism, the financial flexing, the idea that a man is defined by what he acquires. But Reid, who is a veteran, a father, and the founder of the Mindful Momentz initiative, is flipping that script. He's arguing that a man's true value isn't in what he conquers, but in how he heals. And what struck me reading through this is that it's not just a guide for men. It's a mirror for women, too. It's a blueprint for what he calls sacred intimacy. We're going to break this down into 3 parts today. First, we're going to look at the unhealed man, the patterns, the apologies, and the concept of emotional memory. Then, in part 2, we're going to deconstruct the architecture of safety, specifically the 5 ways a woman needs to be protected, which is arguably the most practical section of the book. And finally, we'll talk about covenant love, moving from the idea of a side piece to what Reid calls side piece, and how words become ministry. So settle in, this is going to be good. Part 1, The Unhealed Man and the Great Apology. If you look at the early chapters of this book, J.O. Reid does something rare. He starts with a confession. He doesn't start with advice, he starts with an apology. There's a chapter titled Dating with a Clear Purpose, but it reads more like a collective reckoning for men. He writes, "We have not been the men we needed to be." That's a heavy sentence. He talks about how men often blame their fathers, their mothers, or society for their lack of emotional maturity, but he stops the buck right there. He calls it the apology, and it's essentially an admission that for years, men have been wandering through relationships calling it dating when it was actually just confusion. One of the most profound concepts he introduces here is emotional memory. This is the idea that we carry the ghosts of our past relationships into our current ones. Reid writes about how men, and women too, frankly, often vet their partners based on trauma, not truth. You know, you're looking for red flags because your ex had them, so you project those flags onto the new person. You're fighting a war against a memory, not the person standing in front of you. He says, bodies bounce back, hearts remember. That line really stuck with me. Physical recovery is one thing, emotional recovery is an entirely different discipline. And this leads to what he calls the emotional places I shouldn't have been. This is a fascinating take on boundaries. We usually think of cheating as a physical act, a late-night text, a hotel room, but Reid backs it up. He talks about the manstress, the male equivalent of a mistress. It's about emotional access. It's about giving pieces of your interior life to someone outside the relationship because it's easier than being vulnerable with your partner. He describes it as letting someone else hold emotional space that should be reserved for the woman you love. It starts innocently, venting about work, sharing a frustration, but it dilutes the intimacy at home. He challenges men to ask, am I giving someone else emotional access that should belong to my partner? It's a call to close those doors, not just the physical ones, but the emotional windows we leave cracked open. The core of this first section is really about preparation. Reid keeps coming back to this idea that you cannot lead a family if you haven't led yourself. He distinguishes between a job and a career when it comes to relationships. A job is something you do to pay the bills, it's temporary, it's a placeholder. A career is something you build, you invest in, you identify with. He says too many men treat women like jobs, temporary fillers, instead of approaching them with the intention of a career, of a legacy. It's about shifting from a survival mindset to a building mindset. And you can't build on a cracked foundation, which is why that initial apology, that ownership of imperfection is the necessary first step. Part 2, the architecture of safety. Now, let's move into the mechanics of how this love actually works. This is probably the most technical breakdown in the book, and it revolves around the concept of safety. Reid argues that a woman cannot truly submit, and we'll get to his definition of submission in a minute because it's not what you think. She cannot trust a man until she feels safe. But he's not talking about being a bodyguard. He outlines 5 distinct pillars of protection: mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, and physical. Let's break these down because they change the definition of what it means to be a protector. First, mental protection. This isn't about telling her what to think. It's about being a safe landing pad for her thoughts. Reid writes, "A woman's mind needs to feel safe in your presence." It means not gaslighting her. It means not calling her crazy when her intuition picks up on something your logic missed. It's the discipline of listening to understand, not just to fix. He says, never call her crazy just because you can't follow where her heart is leading her mind. That is such a crucial distinction. It's about validating her intellectual and mental reality. Then there's emotional protection. This is a big one for men who have been socialized to see emotion as weakness. Reid argues that emotional protection means not punishing her for having feelings. A tear is not an attack, he writes. A moment of frustration is not disrespect. This is huge. Often in relationships, when a woman expresses unhappiness, a man hears it as a failure of his provision. Reid is saying, no, stop. Her emotion is a weather system. You are the shelter, not the victim of the storm. It's about stability. Can you stand steady when she's fluctuating? That's protection. Third is spiritual protection. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be a pastor. It means you have a compass. Reid defines this simply. A woman feels safe with a man who consults God before he consults his impulses. That's a powerful metric for leadership. It's not about dominance. It's about submission to a higher authority. If a woman knows you answer to God, she's less afraid of answering to you. It creates a hierarchy of accountability where the man isn't a tyrant, but a steward. Financial protection is interesting because Reid explicitly states it's not about wealth. It's about stewardship. It's not about paying every bill. It is about wise stewardship. It's about having a plan. Anxiety thrives in chaos. Financial protection is simply the removal of chaos. It's looking at the future and saying, I have a strategy for us. It's discipline. A man who can manage his resources signals that he can manage a life. And finally, physical protection. Yes, it's about safety in the traditional sense, but Reid flips it. He says physical protection is about presence and awareness. It's walking on the street side of the sidewalk, yes, but it's also about restraint. Peace is more manly than ego, he writes. A protector knows how to de-escalate. He knows that his strength is for shielding the home, not for intimidating the people inside it. He explicitly says, she should never expect you to resurrect the boy who used to wrestle in backyards. Physical protection is wisdom, not just muscle. I want to touch on how he handles the concept of the independent woman here, because it fits into this safety architecture. Chapter 12 is titled Honoring the Strength You Carry. He acknowledges that modern women have had to be their own protectors, their own providers. They've built their own kingdoms. He writes to the men, your strength is not a threat to me. It is an honor to stand beside it. This is the antidote to the toxic masculinity that feels emasculated by a powerful woman. Reid envisions a partnership where the man says, I want to fight beside your strength, not against it. It's a relay race. Sometimes he's in front, taking the win. Sometimes she is. The goal is to finish together. Part 3. Sacred Intimacy and the Covenant. This brings us to the third and perhaps most spiritual layer of the book, intimacy. Reid plays with language here in a way that's really effective. He takes the colloquial term side piece, which we all know means the other woman, the distraction, the secret, and he reclaims it as side piece, P-E-A-C. He writes, "You are not my side piece. You are my side peace, the stillness beside my storms." This reframing is essential to his view of marriage. It shifts the woman's role from being an object of consumption to being a source of restoration. But, and this is critical, he emphasizes that a man has to be whole enough to recognize peace when he sees it. If a man is addicted to chaos, peace will feel boring. He has to detox from the drama before he can value the peace. He dives deep into what he calls sacred intimacy. He admits candidly that in his past, intimacy was just friction. It was excitement without depth. But the growth journey has brought him to a place where he wants access, not conquest. He talks about making love through conversation, through apology, through forgiveness, long before the clothes come off. "I want the intimacy that leaves peace in the room long after we exhale," he says. This is about integration. It's about the bedroom not being a separate hidden place, but an extension of the emotional safety they've built in the living room and the kitchen. He challenges men to prepare their character for sex, not just their bodies. Don't expect her to trust you with her body if she can't trust you with her heart. And intimately tied to this is the power of speech. Chapter 29, When Your Words Become Ministry, is one of my favorites. We often think of ministry as something that happens in a pulpit on Sunday. Reid says no, ministry happens in the car on Tuesday morning. It happens in the text message you send at noon. He tells women, your voice is not just sound, it is ministry. And he tells men that their words can either dismantle a woman's confidence or build her kingdom. He asks us to be intentional with our tone, our volume, and our silence. Silence, he writes, builds walls between hearts that once felt close. He advocates for a communication style that is surgical, precise, healing, and careful rather than reckless. I want to wrap up this section by talking about the covenant. Reid uses this word intentionally. It's not just a contract. A contract is based on distrust. It protects you if things go wrong. A covenant is based on trust. It binds you together to make things go right. In chapter 19, he tackles the thorny issue of submission. And look, I know that word triggers a lot of people, but Reid reframes it as mutual submission. He asks, will you walk beside me? Not behind, not beneath, beside. He says, I want to lead you as a man who listens, who surrenders his ego. He frames submission not as a power dynamic, but as a posture of service. It's two people bowing to each other because they are both bowing to God. It's the idea that submission to me is not ownership, it's openness. He ends the book with a focus on becoming. He admits he isn't perfect. He has a chapter called Seeking God's Answer, Am I Enough?, where he exposes his own insecurity. He wonders if his best will actually be enough for the woman he loves. And I think that vulnerability is the key to the whole book. It's not a manual written by a guru who has figured it all out. It's a travel log written by a man who is still hiking up the mountain. He writes, I am becoming, deliberately, consistently, and with you in mind. That phrase, with you in mind, is the heartbeat of his message. It's the difference between growing for yourself and growing for the sake of the union. So what is the takeaway here? Whether you are single, dating, or 20 years deep into a marriage, a man's path to God, growth, and her offers a challenge. For the men listening, it's a challenge to stop making excuses. Reid dedicates an entire chapter to no excuses, only effort. He strips away the I wasn't raised that way defense. He says growth is not dependent on history. Love is not limited by what we witnessed. You can build what you never saw. You can be the father you never had. You can be the husband you never saw modeled. It just takes work. And for the women listening, it's a challenge to receive, to recognize safety when it shows up, to honor the effort of a man who is trying, even if he's clumsy with it, to use your words as ministry and your strength as a partner, not a shield. Reid talks about the grace a woman pours into a man's life, not as a sugar mama, but as a spiritual investor, someone who sees the king in him before he's even built the castle. J.O. Reid's work with mindful moments and his writing in this book is ultimately about alignment. It's about aligning your actions with your intentions, your body with your heart, and your relationship with your faith. It's moving from the search, that frantic, endless hunting for the perfect person, to the build. As he says, the search is over, the wandering is done. I'm not seeking a job, I'm seeking a calling. We're going to leave it there for today. I hope this deep dive gave you some language for your own journey. If you're looking for a roadmap that feels less like a rule book and more like a conversation with a wise friend, this is it. Take care of yourselves, check on your strong friends, and keep doing the work. I'll see you next time.